Hey. So we'll see now. I figured do a
Would I take notes? Awesome. It's live. Yeah, congratulations that you managed to subtract history. Yeah. Yeah, I think the meeting will take it. That sounds like an awesome thing.
Hi guys, hello, hello. Test, test, test. Test. Test, test. Test, 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 test. Shh. Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Test, test.
None of the microphones work. Why is that? But we are supposed to start now, aren't we?
Test, test, test. Can you hear me? Does the microphone work? Test, 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 test.
The microphones don't seem to work. None of them. Justin, could you check whether the microphone on the middle works?
Hello, is that on? Okay.
Could someone run over to the registration desk to ask why none of the microphones work? Yeah. Can someone do the meeting minutes? Okay.
Test, test.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Great. Guys, let's start. Can someone do the meeting minutes? I have a special gift for someone who does the meeting minutes. Do I now find someone? No, I won't say one. Who can do the meeting minutes? Chef, can you do the meeting minutes? You get you get this book for free. I'm not kidding. More stuff to carry for you. Okay. Okay. Who's in a Java? I see Eric. Could you check the Java in case Eric has a question? Okay. Thank you all for coming. You know the note well. First, I would like to thank Derek for all his work over a couple of years. And you've seen he has been involved in other activities now and unfortunately had to leave or stop co-chairing the working group. So Kathleen put out the message asking for volunteers to take a seat next to me in the upcoming meetings. So think about that. For some reason, the blue sheets are not here either. They are here. We'll hand around. So I took a look before the meeting, right before the meeting, I took a look at the website and noticed that most of our milestones were out of date. So I tentatively updated them. So when we go through the items, I think we should also think about the completion date of those. Yeah, and I need to add the OR security topics document to the milestone list, which Kathleen needs to approve as well. Here's the agenda. We need to do a little bit of agenda bashing because some of the presenters are not here on Friday, which is our second session in this week. Apologies for that. Mike, or how should we reshuffle it? Tell me quickly on. So we do the presentation. Nat, you are going to be here on Friday. Okay, so you need to do the JPOP presentation today. And William, I think you're also not here on Friday. Okay. So we only need to move the JPOP up there and maybe do the token exchange on Friday instead. Is that okay? Good. Make a slide change here. Perfect. Okay. So, William, do you want to start? Sure. Does it work? Oh. Sorry.
Okay, hi everybody. William Dennis, Product Manager at Google. So I'm talking today about the OAuth 2.0 device flow draft. So I'll just start with a quick recap for anyone who's unfamiliar what this draft is. So this is an authorization flow that's specifically designed for devices that have an internet connection, but they don't have a browser or they have limited input or some combination of that. In this flow, the user will actually review the authorization request on a secondary device. So this could be their phone or it could be a laptop. Here's kind of an example of an app on a TV. So it's displaying the URL that the user has to visit and enter the code. So the user will basically just go to that URL, enter the code, approve the request. While this is happening, the device is actually polling the token endpoint. And if the user does complete this action, then they'll get back either a authorization granted or authorization rejected. These codes typically have an expiry. So after about 30 minutes, for example, this would end up not working. So the requirements are that internet connection and a display mechanism. So it really doesn't matter what that mechanism is. It could be visual, could be audio, but there needs to be some way for the device to actually instruct the user what that code is. So it doesn't need a two-way connection to the user's device. So that's an important distinction. What this means is that a lot of different apps like, say, an Xbox app or a smart TV app, various different kinds of apps that are capable of connecting to the internet, but are not capable of communicating with the local device, that don't have any kind of convenient input mechanisms or a browser. It's sort of broadly applicable to that class. So TV apps, printers, you name it. What it isn't for is a device that has a browser and a rich input mechanism of its own. And I guess there are some exceptions to this. But broadly speaking, those devices like iOS or Android or a Windows Mac device should be using just regular OAuth 2, using the OAuth 2 for native apps BCP. Okay, so what are the changes since last time? It has a new and fairly unwieldy name. The name is attempting to explain the type of device that this is applicable to, avoiding conflicts with other ones. We'd love to have input on the name, but preferably on the list so that we don't waste people's important time here. But the point we're trying to make is that if your device has a browser and a keyboard, then this probably isn't the auth flow that you're looking for. The other change was we had this parameter that was basically a no-op response type in the device authorization request. I think this was a holdover from when the spec was sort of more closely related to the OAuth2 authorization flow and just sort of stayed in there. It turned out no one was actually implementing it. So when we deleted it, we looked at Google's implementation. We weren't using it. Justin looked at the MITRE implementation, and they weren't using it. They weren't even like purposely ignoring it. It was just completely ignored. So this is a good chance if anyone would like to preserve this like potential extension point, speak now or forever hold your peace. And I will point out that the device authorization endpoint is not the OAuth authorization endpoint. This is a really important distinction to make. These are completely separate endpoints, and there's a good reason for this. The OAuth authorization endpoint is assuming that there's a user session, that there's a user agent and user interaction, whereas the device authorization endpoint is more of a back channel thing that the device is doing just to pull down, just to initiate the device authorization request. The other change, this was a suggestion by James Manager from Telstra, was to provide a standardized way of embedding the code in the verification URI. And so this is what we came up with, a fairly straightforward method of composition. Now, importantly, this is an optional enhancement. So a server who is receiving this verification URI does not have to honor the fact that the code is on that URL. That's a very important point. So clients cannot actually assume that will be processed. It's a hint more than it is anything else. The reason behind that is mostly security. So we have some concerns around this device flow that it could open some avenues to phishing attacks. And by embedding the code in there, it potentially makes that easier. So we don't want to force authorization servers to process that. Authorization servers that do process this probably want to have like a Bluetooth-like pairing confirmation screen using that value rather than just simply accepting it and continuing for that reason. You basically want some evidence, or you want the user to confirm that they are looking at their device that has this code, or they just heard their device that has this code, and not that they've just clicked a link on an email.
So Leif Johansson, there is, you're still sort of opening yourself up to a little bit of an attack, right? So, I mean, the user might not pay that much attention to what it's going to just display a little OK button, and it's going to be really comfortable to hit that OK button, right?
I 100% agree. It's unlikely that Google is going to implement this, but that said, I can still see the value to it, and the value is just demonstrated here. So this is an example where the TV app has decided that that say all their users use QR codes, and it would be convenient to display a QR code. And so in this case, it's helpful to have some mechanism of composition of those two things to avoid them being separate. So the spec now documents that method, but then leaves it up to the authorization server to decide how to process it. So if you decide that you're worried the users won't follow your instructions or won't understand what they're pairing, then please, require entry of the code. This is likely what we're actually going to do.
Justin Richard, yeah, I was just going to point out that one thing that's nice about this is that it does degrade nicely. It's that if you don't support extra parameters or composing URLs or whatever on your server, you're just going to prompt the user, which is what you would do had that not been passed in anyway.
Right. Thorsten, yes. And I'm not saying yes to this proposal. I'm really concerned because this is the kind of vague text that we have in the core spec that leads people into
the kind of what text? Sorry.
This kind of text. I mean, you're proposing a feature and saying, "Oh, you don't have to implement that," and we most likely will not implement that. That's basically what you said. For security reasons, I assume. So why is this feature in the spec? I mean, in the end, the device flow is, from my perspective, is vulnerable to session fixation, right? Because you can set up a transaction, and then you can trick the user into authorizing this access. Giving that feature, you can fully automate that. You can send a URL to the victim, clicks on the link, and if it has a single sign-on, You just have to
Okay.
somehow overcome the user consent and you're done.
Let me unpack that a little bit. So firstly, I agree with you in general that it's a really bad idea to specify things that you don't think people are going to use. I'm very much against that. So I was a little bit hesitant to put this in. However, this week I have heard of people that are planning to use this. So it seems like this is something that is going to be used. So let's talk about the security for a minute then. If I was implementing this, how I would do it is I would display a pairing confirmation screen, much like the Bluetooth one, to say, and have instructions like, is your device displaying this code currently? And
Okay.
what I'm saying is I think it would be possible to come up with a user interface that mitigates that concern while avoiding the need to type the code in. I'm not necessarily saying that I've solved that, but I think it's a reasonable thing that could be solved.
I think another option would be to have security considerations text saying this is a really bad idea. If you were to add this kind of parameter, here's how you might do it, but it will lead you to these things, right? And there is a reason why we're not putting this in the spec.
I'm not convinced that it's a bad idea for everybody. So a case came up on the weekend where there might be a device that has a QR scanner. I don't know. I think it's a useful composition to document, and we've documented it in such a way that no one is forced to use it. And as Justin said, it does fall back extremely gracefully.
So William, who proposed that feature?
James Manager.
Okay.
He actually proposed a feature that required this code to be processed. Yeah. So we actually changed that to be an optional feature.
I'm totally surprised because I learned James is a very paranoid type of guy. But okay, I just took a look into the security consideration section. It discusses this kind of attack. It's called remote phishing, but I think it needs more thorough analysis and discussion, because I'm not really convinced that this cannot be utilized in a combination of phishing with click checking and all this stuff. Because in the end, if you just everything you do is show a confirmation screen, then an attacker could also get past this confirmation screen if you do not really require an input by the user. So it still has it causes a mixed feeling.
I mean, what if you supplied all but the last character? I mean, there's a lot of things that you could do, right, if you wanted to. Okay.
What Torsten said off
That's
mic
good
is that it
feedback.
should be described. And Justin Richer again. And I think that if we're going to include this, we definitely should have some security and privacy considerations about what this could leak if things go wrong and whatnot. The other consideration is that it is really, really hard to spell out UX in a spec like this for things as diverse as OAuth authorization servers. So the best we could do, if we're to include this as a feature, is to give an example of one way that might not be horrible, but requirements beyond that I think might be lost.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to solve users randomly clicking on things clicking through too quickly and not reading instructions. We're not going to solve that in this spec.
Right. We're not going to solve phishing in this spec.
William, would it be fair to ask the group whether they actually want to include that feature in an upcoming version of the spec?
I think that's fair. I mean, I'm certainly interested to hear of anyone that wants to use this as since there is additional risk that one way is just document the risk, right? I think everyone agrees that this is taking on slightly more risk. So I think what we want to do is, if anyone who actually needs this, they should get that on the record, I guess, as a reason for introducing that risk. I think I would be happy to put James Manager on his behalf on there because he proposed it.
I will say that there are other use cases, like one that I'm deploying right now, where the verification step is not happening in a traditional, plucky end user with their smartphone typing in or clicking on a URL or something like that. Our use case is, not to get into too many details, but it is a 2-device use case, but the secondary device requires an authorized login from a trusted system and a trusted third party, not the end user themselves. So it's a device verification kind of flow. It technologically fits perfectly with the device flow. Hence why I agree that the title is terrible. But again, not here.
Suggestions welcome on the list.
Absolutely.
But that so far would have just worked fine with the current document. Doesn't require that extension.
It doesn't require the extension, but the way that we're doing device presentation at the Trusted Thing, this would make it a lot easier for us.
Right.
But we could also get around without having this just as easily.
And in your case, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have educated and trained users, right?
We don't have educated trained users. We have educated trained third parties to make sure that our educated third parties are the ones that are in charge of example.com/device. End users aren't going there on their own browsers.
So you can, yeah. So I think the concerns of blindly clicking through is less of a concern in your deployment. And in a way, I think that's actually why it's worth having this documented.
It's worth having a discussion of whether or not it should be included, because honestly, in our case, that's so far outside of the process because it's a third party and a trusted kiosk and stuff. We don't actually need it to be the device URL that has that parameter in the code and everything.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Lucy Lynch, NSRC. So Hannes asked if we should poll the room. I actually call sparkly unicorns here. I don't think you have enough data. Referring to several people that you've heard from who might have a use case without any background on the specifics of why they have a use case, and Justin just said he can get by without it. I would really like to see an example of something that's a requirement that would need this feature before you add it to the list.
I mean, yeah, so I find myself in an interesting position here because I actually opposed this before I wrote a version of it that let me show. I opposed it until I sort of understood a little bit more, and then I attempted to write a version that I would be comfortable with, even from that position of being skeptical. I think that's a very good point. I think that anyone who wants this, probably we want to have them speak up and make sure that there is a validated use case. I completely agree.
So, John, is that working? John Bradley Ping. So I have talked to people doing more industrial IoT as opposed to consumer IoT, where they have a trusted portal that they're trying to register devices in. And one of the requirements is to have more entropy in the code, primarily because they have no UI on the actual device itself. They're pre-printing this on a sticker, pre-registering it. So what they want, I have had people say, yes, what we want to do is to be able to scan the QR code as part of the registration process without having to have the person actually type in the extra piece of information.
So that gets into extremely scoped cases, which requires extremely scoped documentation or security considerations.
Okay.
So I'm Tony Nadlin. We also have the same case that John describes as far as locks are concerned, and manufacturers of locks that we've talked to have this actually etched in the lock, where you wind up just taking you just wind up taking a picture of it and going that way. So I don't think it is a scoped at all. I mean, this is manufacturers are doing this today.
All right.
So we all know that there are multiple classes of IoT, things that are IoT devices. Well, constrained devices of some sort. So I think this fits some classes of those devices, which isn't necessarily where we started with TVs.
Sure.
So I think that as long as we describe, the sorts of devices that this has a benefit to and what the risks of using it for the wrong kind of device, I would prefer to leave it in the spec. Otherwise, we're going to have to do a different spec and re-add it as a profile.
Okay, so I definitely have the feedback to document the security considerations of this. I guess that's probably the action item that I'm going to take. If anyone is like really, really against it, Torsten.
Torsten, just a question to John's use case. In the use case you described, all those codes, do these codes expire once they are used the first time?
That is still a conversation with the device manufacturer. The notion at the moment is that those codes are only active for a window when you go through some boot up process with configuration process with the device. But the code would be used multiple times, but you would have to do something with the device, push a button, plug it in, stick your hand in the boiling oil, or.
Jesus, Thorsten, I'm not surprised about this answer. I would suggest to treat this use case differently and to specify it differently, because if the use is the code is more or less used as an identifier for the device for provisioning purposes, this is completely different from the semantics of the device code in the spec.
So maybe what we should do, because we also need to pay attention to the time, is we maybe should move that to an email, to the email list, and discuss the requirements a little bit more. And then, as Thorsten said, like trying to figure out, like, are we maybe? I think we need to think this through a little bit more.
Yeah,
sounds like.
Yeah,
but it's still an interesting thought.
I'll put it on the list. Yeah, I guess my hypothesis is that it would be possible to do this in a way that is secure from a usability point of view, and therefore we shouldn't prevent it. That was sort of why, in the end, that I accepted it despite being against it. I felt like I wouldn't put it past someone to come up with a good pairing UI that really tells the user, are you looking at the TV that is displaying that code, and make sure that they actually are. I mean, I'm just saying that my belief that is possible means that I feel like it's worth.
Captain Moriarty, that just scares me, right? From a privacy standpoint, I can't even see the IESG letting that go through in writing.
Sorry, can you explain the privacy concern?
You know that person is watching that TV show where they are. That's
no. I meant that they were looking at the TV. So so this is the TV that's showing the code, right? And then I scan the QR code on my.
Where's that TV?
In my living room. Like I just bought it. It's a smart TV.
It's not a program. It's just a sticker, for example, or it shows it on the screen.
Oh, just for registering. Okay.
Yeah. So
when I thought you were displaying it, by the way you phrased that last time.
Well, I mean, it is also displayed. So think about it like this.
Yeah.
Let's discuss this on the mailing list.
Let's stay on the mailing.
Yeah. Let's not try to dig ourselves the hole a little bit deeper.
I don't think there's a privacy concern. I mean, it's a user-initiated action that they want to authenticate their device. They've chosen to authenticate their device. That's so there are some examples like the YouTube app. You could have like a printer app. So say you want your printer to be connected to a document service to print documents. Printer doesn't have a browser or a keyboard, so you're going, I want to configure Box or I want to configure Google Drive or something, and you click the button, and then the printer is doing this, and this is displayed on the printer, and then you pull out your phone, potentially scan a QR code or type in the code, and then you can approve that request for the printer. The printer then gets an OAuth access token and can access your documents in order for you to print them. So it's a user-initiated flow. It's certainly not any ambient. Okay. So we also added security considerations to the document. So the previous drafts actually didn't have any. So we're covering a whole bunch there. So it'd be good to get working group feedback and review on those points, and maybe we can add some more. Okay, so this is hopefully an uncontroversial change. We added a definition for the OAuth2 authorization server metadata. Actually, we're already using that. I did some interrupt testing earlier today with Justin. It's quite useful having that as sort of machine readable documentation. It's quite useful. We also clarified that the rules around expiry. So we do recommend that tokens expire at some point. That is really up to you to control though. And there's no requirement that they expire, but typically they will. In terms of running code, so the Google AS was non-compliant in two ways. One was that we used a grant type that was not the one in the spec, so we've actually already fixed that. And the second is the code parameter. We're still actually using code, much like OAuth, as opposed to device code from the spec. So it seems like most of the people I spoke to this week do like the device code option. So we'll probably just be updating that. You can view an example at youtube.com/TV to avoid buying a smart TV. To try this. So MITRE ID 1.3 will have this feature reportedly. Justin and I ran interrupt testing today in the terminal room, and we actually got it to work with a few bugs and a few DOSes and a few databases that got corrupted, but it was all good. So that's open source. You should be able to try that out. From a client perspective, this is a Google-specific client, so there's a little bit non-compliant, but once the spec is suitably stable, we plan to move that into AppAuth and make sure it's a stable version. I did upload the code that I used with Justin, so you can play around with that if you like to.
There are a couple of other implementations as well. Yeah.
Right.
Open source implementations.
Right.
ForgeRock and the European Broadcasting Association, they also had produced code that they posted on a mailing list.
Okay. These are the ones that I've actually tried myself, that's all.
Yeah. Cool.
Perhaps we should get them to post their code. Or
Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically for the write-up. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Jim Fenton. Is there anything in the spec or any notion of how to revoke a device authorization? I mean, what happens when you sell that TV or that printer?
Okay, so
That
one.
would never happen.
Or maybe we should just crush them when we're done.
Just kidding.
So once the refresh token and access token are granted, then it's much like any other OAuth authorization. So I would say nothing special to the method of authorizing. It's the same problem as if you had a browser and a keyboard. But
Right, but you don't have an interface on the device in order to initiate a revocation from the device when you're about to sell it. So
I guess most devices that I've used have at least like a reset button that will at least drop all the tokens by erasing the memory.
Right. You could also revoke it server side in most implementations.
Yes.
So yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a very true IoT problem. What I got up to point out though was that it's important to not confuse the device authorization code with the access token that is granted as a result of properly applying that. So there was also a question when the token revocation specification went through of whether or not we should allow revocation of other things like authorization codes and all of these other temporary credentials and things like that. We as a working group decided that the complexity of supporting revoking these credentials, which are partial and intended to be temporary, was not worth sort of the extra over engineering that would be required. So currently there is nothing in the spec about revocation. Also, some devices do have enough of a UI that you could just say, throw away my access tokens or log out. I know I can on my Roku with YouTube today. I can log out today. People are already doing this. And that's separate from how it got the tokens.
That's a really good point. So this flow uses a device authorization endpoint, but then just the regular token endpoint. The refresh token, access token that are issued on that token endpoint, at least in our implementation, are exactly the same as any other token that's issued, just with a little bit of different metadata attached. So yes, you can use OAuth token revocation. You can drop them on the floor. You can, however you are normally revoking tokens is applicable. That is certainly a good point for manufacturers of those devices. They absolutely need a reset button. All right, any further questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Nat? So I was hoping, like the document is further along, but there was good feedback, and so would probably take us, let's say, a month to discuss these type of things and then see where we are.
That's the old version.
Old version. Oh my God. Okay. Give me a second. Okay. Where did you send it to?
to that thread.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Is this the new version?
Yes.
I will upload the most recent version. Sorry, the guys on the phone.
Yeah, not too much change. I can also talk about those. So thanks for giving me time today for describing this auth J-pop thing. The auth J-pop actually is a parallel document to 6750, which is bearer token usage. This is JWT pop token usage. Okay. So we talked about something like this probably 2 years or 3 years ago, and then we believe that the token binding is going to solve them all, and we stopped, considering this kind of things. But that was not quite the case. On some circumstances, it clearly wasn't the token binding for the short time is not giving us an answer. For example, in the cases that I know about is they can't touch the infrastructure and everything has to be done at the application layer. And also need somehow to tie back to TL's client authentication or something like that. And they actually need it now. For example, UK Open Banking, they have to code it now. So I and John, several other people came up with something called J-pop, right? And I've just sent out the draft 04 to the mailing list. And the draft defines JWT pop token, sender constraint token, which is, there are two types of them, DN constraint token, client ID constraint token, and then there are key constraint tokens as well, which is actually described pretty much in RFC 7800. Okay, and then we talk about the resource access method. One way to do it is to tie into the mutual TLS. The other is the signature, pretty much as in the digest authentication. And then we talk a little bit about authorization error and IANA consideration. Now, the JWT POP token looks like this. It has to have issuer, audience, IAT, issued at, and expiration, and confirmation object. And confirmation object can have several times. It's saying CN, but it's typo, DN confirmation method, right? It used to be CN, but it's now DN. So in the confirmation, you just have DN as a string. And then client ID confirmation method, you've got client ID down there. JKU confirmation method, you've got JKU and KID. That's KID should be small KID. It's the PowerPoint kind, right? And in addition, the document has a whole bunch of other things which has been defined in IANA registry and other documents. And it's a discussion point if we need to keep them all, but we have put them all for this document right now. And then we got resource access method. Mutual TLS access method is used for CN confirmation method and other things. And then signature method for key confirmation methods. And the mutual TLS access method, I didn't create any special slides because it's pretty much, just one paragraph thing. the confirmation record, confirmation, what do you call, object actually has matched to the what you got in the TLS client authentication. So that's pretty straightforward. For the signature method, it's pretty much the same as the digest authentication, except it's not using MD5, but JWS. And that's it. And downside of us not start standardizing it now is that groups like Open Banking Standards in the UK will probably start doing their own things, or not even mandating anything, but each bank start doing their own. Well, how about the interoperability? So I think it's a good idea to start doing it here now. So my request to the working group is to please adopt the draft as a working group item so that we can formally start discussing. That's my last slide.
So John Bradley Ping. So one of the things that's motivated pushing this forward now, we thought about doing it last year and the year before, but without a clear consumer of this, we didn't want to confuse people with the work that we're doing on token binding. And I think token binding is still the right way for consumer applications, but we have banks that are doing server to server stuff, and they have their own CA and they have their own set of laws, etc. And they're looking for advice. How do they do mutual TLS proof of possession with OAuth? So having something that we can at least discuss with them is better than throwing our hands up in the air and say, make something up on your own. So that's why we're at least trying to get this written down and get some feedback from the working group so that we have stuff to discuss with the various banks and other folks that are wanting to move forward with mutual TLS before token binding, or they're not interested in token binding at all because they're really just interested in server-to-server interactions.
John, this is related to this payment service directive that came out recently?
It's related to both the PSD2 and to the open banking regulations, which are related but not exactly the same. So there are the Open Banking Consortium in the UK was created as a result of UK government regulations around opening up banking APIs in the same way that PSD2 is, except that they have a deadline of the end of this year for the major 8 banks to actually have OAuth APIs opened up. So they are under a tight timeline. So telling them we'll get back to you in a year or so isn't making them happy.
Tony?
Tony Nadlin. So we tried to wait for token binding also, but we've had to implement some stopgap measures in between. But it is different than what you guys have done here. So, I'm not sure that the current draft would be the only way that I would approach this. There's other things that we would probably want to consider if we needed to take on this working item.
Can you explain on what you did, Tony?
If we accept this as an effort, we'll submit what we've done as our stopgap measure into here.
That'd be great, actually.
We would be more than happy to take your input but this at least kicks the ball off so that we can pry whatever thing that is, of course, totally interoperable that you've done in secret out of you so that the rest of us can interoperate on it.
I don't know, Tony. Brian Campbell Ping. I did read, I think, 01 of this morning before you pushed 3 more revisions, so I'm not sure how up to date it is. But in my opinion, there's way too many options in this. And hearing the use cases that it's driven at, which is mutual TLS for these banks so they don't go off and do something else. And if that's the problem we're trying to solve, we should solve that problem, which would mean getting rid of the JPOP part of it, the
the nonce challenge response signature, it would mean, and I think we could do away with a number of the confirmation methods around mutual TLS that either aren't applicable in some cases or introduce a lot of complexity on the resource side, like the JKU method would, that complexity belongs at the authorization server layer, not at each of the individual resources. So scaling it back would be generally, I think, more appropriate, particularly if there's tight timelines here. Whatever it's worth.
That's a fair request. So, like, why did you put so many different options in there?
Actually, we've listed out everything which is defined in IANA.
Okay.
So I'm the guilty party. It was everything that was in the existing IANA plus a couple of IANA didn't have the thumbprint, etc. defined, so I did make up some of them. What I wanted to do was get the list
Okay,
of
you want
possible
to
things to do.
show the solution space.
I agree with Brian that we should maybe have one thing that we actually do, but unless we actually compare the options, get some input from Microsoft or other people, and then pare it down to one, maybe two ways of doing it, I agree, but unless we actually write down what the options are, it's hard to discuss them.
Makes sense, yeah.
Unless, again, if you're trying to solve a very specific use case on a tight time frame, another approach would be to solve that use case on a tight time frame instead of enumerating all possible options and then trying to get input from someone that probably won't give it, that will be totally different, and then slow down the whole thing. And what I'm suggesting is that this approach likely will not get you the results you want. You will have a document that we're talking about what options should it be, client ID or this type of confirmation method, in 2 years having the same conversations after the banks have already deployed whatever it is they're going to be deploying.
I'm okay with stripping it down or doing it as multiple documents, but we of course always get the criticism of having too many documents.
Andy Fregley, VeriSign. I represented my company in several of the IoT consortiums. And what
Could you talk a little bit louder?
Yeah, there's all this stupid noise on my back. Okay.
So anyway, what I'm seeing, I'm kind of new to this group, but I've been watching the mailing list, and what I'm seeing is a kind of a convergence on what you're doing from a high level perspective. It's going to cryptographic proofs of trust in what you're doing with the clients and the authentication. And I don't know, like this group's been focused on like interactive authentication and authorization, well, the open ID with the authentication. And I think you really need to look, from my perspective, at what's happening out there with other groups as far as how they're doing cryptographic proofs of identity for devices. And if anybody wants to talk to me about that later, I'm seeing a convergence. And you guys, I think, need to decide if you really want to go into that world, because there are other approaches being considered.
Which other groups do you have in mind in particular?
Well, I took part in the Industrial Internet Consortium in what they were doing, the All-Seen Alliance, and what they were doing. And plus our company investigated this for about a year with an initiative that we had internally. So, yeah, I'd love to talk to some people about it, because I see some convergence, and I see you moving toward cryptographic approaches, but you also have all this legacy way of doing everything through the user agent and using redirect.
Yeah, I think there's also, you may be interested in the work we do in ACE. I don't know if you've been to that group earlier today, where we are using OAuth specifically for the IoT use case, where we are not always involving the user quite naturally. So I don't know if you are aware of that effort.
So
I will
this
send you some pointers.
this doesn't have any impact or relationship with the user authentication. This is about device authentication, where Goldman Sachs is using a certificate to authenticate itself to Barclays, and they want to make sure that the tokens that are issued are actually presented by Goldman Sachs, etc.
Yeah, and that's why I'm mentioning it. That's why you need to consider whether you really want to do that, because that's the use case that a lot of the IoT guys are pursuing. That exact no user interaction, pure cryptographic proof, and versus interactive, verification, which is where it's come from in the past.
There's interactive user consent and verification of the user in issuing the token. The question is wielding the token, and it's not really a matter of what I want to do. It's, as you know, that the large financial institutions seem to have their own opinions. The question is, how do we keep them from shooting themselves in the foot by some rather creative things I've seen them propose?
Yeah, I worked on Wall Street for quite a while, so let's talk offline about it.
Thorsten?
And you will come back, I bet. This is Thorsten. A lot of questions popped up in my mind when I was standing in the line. First of all, can you really nail down the use case you want to address? Can you really give us a statement, nail down the use case you want to address? Can you do that, please?
What, John? Whoever.
You start speaking, John is coming from me.
So you want me to state it?
Yeah. What's the use case?
So the use case we have at hand is most urgent one is that the banks wants to set up their own CAs, and they want to issue the certificates to the fintech companies, and they want the fintech companies to use that certificate to authenticate their client to the authorization server, and tie
which is not the use case you draft,
and
addresses.
Tie that client authentication to the token.
Okay, so which first of all means that there is a relationship between Brian's draft on TLS authentication towards the authorization server, potentially.
Right. Yeah. So Brian's draft, as I understand, is the client authentication to the token endpoint, right? So
okay.
We depend on that, kind of. To embed the information about certificate in this case DN, we need the information from that.
Okay, so that sounds reasonable to me. I would suggest to either put both in the same draft, or to really explicitly state this relationship. So if this is the use case, why do we need 4 confirmation methods? I don't get it.
I think I sort of understand it, because the idea was to explore the solution space and then let the group pick one and go with that one. That's
okay,
how
I would also strongly
John.
advise to go with exactly one method.
John Bradley again. So the feedback that I've gotten from the banks is all they really care about is that distinguished name. They don't actually care about any of the other confirmation methods. But coming before this group and saying, oh, look, aren't we smart? We're going to use distinguished names for uniquely identifying things. I can expect some number of people to have. So we provided some alternatives. I feel so dirty recommending using distinguished names in this way, and there are certainly flaws that in this process and scalability issues that will need to be documented. If you had multiple CAs all using distinguished names, you'd have differences, and you'd have to have a canonicalization process. There's all sorts of things where this could go wrong. But if you have one CA that's going to issue certificates to these entities where there isn't a unique common name, etc., then using the string that you produce out of distinguished name kind of works. If so what the banks want to do is issue a certificate to Goldman Sachs and issue a software statement along with that says what the distinguished name is, and then have Goldman Sachs go around to all the other banks and be able to use that software statement to register, and all of the actual transactions, the client authentication, and token presentments all have to be done over TLS channels that contain the distinguished name that the central banking authority put in the original software statement. So they want to combine OAuth dynamic client registration with traditional PKI. God help us all. I did not come up with this.
So John enables. Yeah. Okay. So the last question is more about the role of this group in this whole activity. I mean, having tried to chair a working group at another standardization body, which tried to provide another industrial initiative with the protocol and API underpinning. My question is, are we supposed to provide this banking initiative on time with all the ideas and protocols and APIs that they can accomplish their goal? I think we will fail. Because if they want to deploy something this year, they have to build the software within the next month. And we won't be able to provide them with a specification and in this time frame. So what's our role in this game?
Well, at least we should be able to give some kind of guidance, in general guidance as a group. It won't be a finished thing, but instead of letting them do some random things, I think it would be really.
Sorry, I think some of the working group members can consult them and can help them and give them advice. But we as a working group do not run on a timeline or on a project plan, right? I think that's a real problem. Mm-hmm. It's a real issue. I'm really concerned.
So I'm not so crazy as to suggest that we can have an RFC by the end of the year, or even maybe by the end of the following year, knowing our track record. But having something that they can at least point to and as a working group draft actually helps them significantly, because that's just the way that their bureaucratic process works. If there is something in a standards body, it's easier for them to at least discuss it because it's not coming from a single vendor.
Okay, I hear the words. This is Thorsten again. The worst case that can happen is that in a year time frame we have a draft which describes something. It's being implemented in several places, and afterwards every proposal for a change is answered by no. This is already implemented and deployed. We can't change that. And I've seen that too often. So I'm staying concerned.
Lucy Lynch, NSRC, +1 to what Thorsten just said. The idea of putting a draft out so that you have something for a conversation point with people who are in a fast implementation process when you know you're not going to have completed or defendable work makes me even more concerned about the scope of the document and the number of options as opposed to the single use case that you're addressing. The only positive I see out of this is that you would get additional potential solutions on the table, since Tony said they would submit immediately, but then you have 2 drafts for reference. So just saying.
But on the other hand, I also think it's good if there are consumers who want to use OAuth and actually reach out to the OAuth working group. In some sense, that's a positive thing, like people just don't randomly do things. They actually come to us because they believe that we can work this out with all the caveats that are there. But question-wise, first of all, we are running out of time, and second, who has read the document? Not the one that Nat submitted today, but some version. Yeah. So maybe we can sort of find some reviewers and get that discussion going. I think that's the best that we can do at that time. You see a few hands, but not many. Anyone interested in this topic? Thorsten, you go, Brian. Who else? Anyone else? Another. I'm trying to find a reviewer. What was your first name? Andy.
Okay,
that's good.
pretty good.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks very much.
So if I read time correctly, then we are actually done. Is that correct? I think we ran a little bit over time, so we have to. Luckily, we have some time left on Friday to go through the rest. So we actually good. Oh, blue sheets. Has everyone signed the blue sheet? If you haven't signed the blue sheet, raise your hand so we can pass it around. Yeah.
This is Thorsten again. I would kindly ask you to give the security document a review. So today, the first version of the working group document was published. So please give it a review and provide me with comments so we can bring this document forward. Thanks.
Yeah. Guys, and pay attention to this lovely book that Justin and Antonio worked on, fresh from the press.
Yeah, so the OAuth 2 in Action book is out. If you would like a discount code, come find me. And I appreciate that. If you would like me to deface your book with a signature, I will happily do so. If you would like me to digitally sign your PDF or Kindle file, I can do that as well. I got a request for that from somebody. Yeah, he bought the ebook. He's like, but I want it signed. I was like, you can do that.
Here, and you can also do it yourself. Here's my private key.